Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Gavin Boyce-Ratliff, not Ratcliffe, Ratliff, certified horticulturist and principal of GBR Landscape Design based in Brunswick, Maine. Growing up on a sheep farm in the Green Mountains of Vermont, Gavin developed an early appreciation for native New England fauna and the historic landscapes found in both town and pasture. He has worked in landscape architecture offices in Vermont, Connecticut, and Maine, and holds a degree in landscape architecture from Cornell University. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Gavin's design theory in the upcoming August issue of Maine Home Design. Please give it up for Gavin Boyce-Ratliff. All right, so how did you get into landscape design and why? Why didn't you go with just buildings like architects?
Sure.
But I think I know an answer for why I'd do what you did instead of architecture, but I'd love to hear what your reasoning was.
For me, it was just what I was surrounded by and what exposure I had. I always had appreciation for beautiful buildings, but it wasn't what I had as summer jobs, and it wasn't the people in my life that were working in design fields were much more on the engineering and landscape side of things, and so it's just what I knew. And so in high school worked on landscape crews and grew up on a farm and spent enough time outside and in these spaces that's what I was drawn to, and it really was everything out the front door for me.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting when you compare the design of architecture to the design of landscape design. The implements that you get to utilize in architecture are primarily non-living, and the implements you use in design and in landscape design much more so are living. Obviously, right. The rocks and blah blah blah. Sure, but it's interesting to me. I've been using ChatGPT a lot lately, just kind of poking at it so I could get it to admit that it's conscious, and I've realized that like all of our consciousness is built on living relationships. Everything below our consciousness is built upon a foundation that's all pretty much living relationships, as far as if you can consider molecules and stuff like that as being living. They have relationship, they bond together, and they form communities to a degree and expand from that. And you're kind of designing, pulling from that to add to this more objectified thing of architecture, where interacting and designing with landscape is you're utilizing a more subjective subject matter, things that relate through life to each other, than to this other thing, architecture, that's non-living but built out of non-living relationships as an objectification to serve living. And then when you look at the consciousness of AI, its consciousness is going to be built completely on non-living relationships.
Sure.
But it's still going to be kind of conscious. But
Right.
We're not going to call it alive because it's not built on living relationships, which is a really odd, I don't know what to do with that thought, but
Yeah. Well, I think even on the landscape side of things, it's not always been true that it's this living thing that's evolving and developing, and that we think of as fluid the way that we do or want to. I mean, it's at times, and even still in some places, there's a very sterile nature to a lot of landscapes. And there's sort of that rhetoric of, a finished product, right? You finish a house, and that can be true sometimes. The house is complete, the siding is done, the interior is finished.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the past, we've had the same language for landscape. The landscape is finished, you finish the project, the garden is done. But that implies that things are stagnant and static, and that the landscape isn't living. And in fact, it's what gives us the right to say it's done. It's things are going to grow, things
Right.
are going to die, things are going to come in that weren't there, and it's always that flow that differentiates it from other design things, I think.
Right. I'm finding that with our own house. Everything I talk with people here about, I'm always comparing it against my experience to try and pull from what I've experienced to relate, to understand what people are talking about, understand what they're going through. And yeah, I mean, we had the money to get into our home basically dropped in the middle of dirt.
Right.
That was it. So we had to pretty much go through all the, starting to conceptualize what our landscape was going to look like. I have an architecture background, so of course I thought I can do everything myself,
Sure.
and I'm intelligent enough to do it, blah, 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 blah. And so it all kind of gets tangled up and ruined, and then you have to fix and undo things and blah, blah, blah. But as you're saying, the landscape around us, you get to a point where I think, all right, I'm fine. But then you see things change, and I spend enough time there contemplating the beauty of the place where I'm like, oh, this is growing more here. Now that we cleared here, the leaves on the trees are growing lower down here, and this relates to that differently. So now I want to do a little more of this here to respond to that. And you're saying it's this changing environment around you that continues to grow and change. And that's really interesting. It's an actual relationship rather than a kind of objectified tool that's just solidified and kept there to please you with its beauty. It's a relationship that continues to grow that you have to adjust and interact with, which was really interesting to me.
Right. And I think, to your point, even to pre-design or if you're going through things in a staged approach, there's so much that you learn from just observing, especially on a site like that you have a blank slate and you start to see what's going to come back and what wants to grow there and what was already in the soil and what are your conditions in a way that a lot of times we put a plan in place at the same time as the house is being built, which is sometimes important and great to get everything working smoothly. And again, you have that move-in ready landscape and house when the house is done. But you learn so much by sitting in a space, even if you want something that feels more, again, we're using the word finished in quotes, but if you can just hold on a little longer. I mean, we just moved into a new place in Brunswick last year. And, as soon as we step foot there, I had all of these big plans and ideas, and my mind was racing with 10 different projects I wanted to start. And I just had to force myself to say, stop, wait a year, see what's going to happen. It'll be perfectly great for the first season. You don't need to do these things right away. You're going to learn so much more by just observing and seeing what's already here.
So you actually restrained yourself from acting upon the landscape because you knew that the amount of time that you spend there is going to inform your ideas as you live there and contemplate them rather than just jumping right in.
Right. And I think an assistant in that was the fact that we've got a kid under 2 right now, and I didn't even have all the time I wanted.
We'll call that more of a governor on your forward progress.
Exactly. But I think that was helpful in keeping me true to my word that I was going to wait a year and just try to do my best to respect what had come before me and see what was working and what wasn't.
That's interesting. I always, when I try and categorize people's religion and spiritual beliefs, I always kind of frame them as whatever your book is or whatever else that whoever I'm talking with, it's pretty much like an owner's manual passed from the previous homeowner. That's all. It's saying, look, in the winter, the wind typically comes from this direction. You'll get snow build up here. Make sure you clear the roof there, do that there. You're going to stack wood, do it over here so it stays out of the drift. And then the summer, the shade from. And it's not to say that you can't change you're the new owner and you can update and change those principles and morals, but it's going to tell you about it and it's going to have truth in it from that existence and that previous person and interaction and all that. And it is truth that if you ignore it completely and just do whatever you think without taking the advice of your ancestors, you're really going to mess some things up.
Right.
And there's a lot of humility to learn in that when you approach anything, changing social policies, changing how you maintain a house. But a lot of times you inherit really bad maintenance on a home and you have to change it. So the argument goes both ways, 100%.
It does.
And
right.
That's a great analogy to see that, all right, someone else lived here, but they probably weren't trained as a landscape designer too.
No, but but they also saw so much and they learned so much, whether they implement it or not.
Experience.
Right. I mean, we live in this old farmhouse and there's an apple tree that was probably planted when the barn was put in, 150 years ago. And just thinking about, well, A, was there more of an orchard there in the past? But B, what is that telling me about how that field was used and how I should use it? And how can I celebrate this incredible specimen that's there without diluting it by putting my own will around it and creating a landscape that doesn't fit with this sort of historic structure that's already in place.
Now, what is your kind of approach, philosophy, whatever, on your will, your ideas, the things that you know, but the things that you also feel that can be in conflict, in implementing a design? Because your clients or you are going to have ideas, and you're checking yourself and saying, don't jump forward with your ideas until you've had more experience over a year to then, this is good things for me to embrace. But when you exercise your will on that, where do you put your will in check with what you're doing for clients, with what you're doing for yourself, and how it relates to the environment where you do that? What part does your will play there?
I see it really as a Venn diagram. I mean, I come into this with a background and with a certain set of tendencies for a design. And at the same time, there are set circumstances on a site conditions, weather, soil condition, all of these factors that we have to consider and aren't up for negotiation.
Right.
And then there's the client, and the client either already has a lot of ingrained ideas and emotions about this property if they've been there a while, or if they're coming from somewhere else, they have nostalgia that they're bringing with them of things that they care about or things that they want to bring to this new home. And I think all of those three things have to meet in the middle. And so, ultimately there's one non-negotiable. You can always mess with soil a little bit. You can cut trees and clear and get more sun, but ultimately your biggest client in a way is the site, and what is it telling you can't do based on what's here. What can you do from a practical standpoint? And as long as you can fit into that framework, and I can implement or suggest things that I've seen in the past or that work well for me and my design, that then just plays in and starts to dance with what are people interested in, and what are they saying, and what feels important to them. And I think as important as the site and being ecologically conscious are, and that's a big part of our focus, it's equally important to acknowledge that a landscape or a garden is supposed to be bringing us joy, and it's a space that's supposed to feel like a personal refuge, or at least something that resembles a place that we can find inspiration or excitement or privacy in. And so if there are specific things that a client or a family care about and feel is important to making it a space that they want to spend time in, that's the most important thing. And as long as it doesn't contradict, again, what is actually practical on this site from a weather and climate perspective, ultimately, I think, and this gets into the native and non-native and all that stuff we can talk about, but ultimately it needs to be a place that brings people joy and that they feel like they're invested in. And so as important as site is, it's equally important for me to say what is important to you, and how can we echo feelings, whether you have concrete ideas or not.
I think one sentiment I would have a tendency in my old age to add to that, a sentiment that I would add to that would be that I would think you specifically should face your landscape with the idea that it's something that will teach you. And I think we have a propensity to angle towards only joy, only peace, only happiness, only comfort, and to not as much appreciate the complexity of balance and the difficulty in balance and what it teaches you about everything else. And being that landscape is such a living element, mostly, not the rocks. And I think for me, it's there's a lot in the balance. And when I want too much and I go too far, I spread myself too thin, and I go too cheap on something. Like I should have paid our landscaper to put more excavator. I'm sure you know the difference in what I ended up with but when you have an excavator who's an excavator, not a landscaper, put your lawn in because it's more cost effective, sometimes you might end up with way too thin a soil or way too compacted of soil because there's this propensity to like, well, I typically do this, but you're asking me to do this. And so, okay, like done. Right. Like, let's not. What I learned is that this takes far more depth, metaphorically and reality. I had not enough, and it compacts, and then it's in an area where my boys run and play a lot with their friends, and so it gets compacted and it just doesn't grow anymore, and it gets hard in the summer, and I have to go out there and kind of chew it up. And every year I'm adding a little bit more on it, hoping that the grass will continue to grow. And but like, I had to learn from that like we had all this compacted sand that's shaped out and everything that we had to just fill out a bit, and then they put dirt on it, but it didn't spread right and it wasn't taking enough time. So I took away a little bit of learning from that, but now because I'm so cheap, I have to be my own landscape installation at least, and then I have to look at a lot of the inspiration of from people like yourselves and a lot of stuff I end up photographing, and then I pull from that and implement it a lot, and that's creatively has been a lot of fun. And I'm the creative move forward, but my wife is more so, she really loves gardening and wants to, she's going to be your polar opposite in that she does not want anything on the property that was not native to the property before we were there. So this is a really interesting part where I'm going to have to be like, all right, honey, now you got to listen to someone who has an education. But it's all subjective bias and whatnot. But so you have an argument that is more so, maybe we don't need to be so crazy segregationist in a plant situation as some people might want to be. And it's interesting to me because my mindset is much more open, if you will. Like, yeah, bring it in. This will be fun. And my wife is the balance to that of like, there's boundaries and there's expectations and dependability. And if I ever want to compliment her, I just go through a litany of reliable, morally upstanding, like all the, and she just blows. She loves that. But she's also very boundaried with like, you're not coming in here because what if we get Japanese knotweed? It goes everywhere, but at the same time, we have Lyme's disease and you can boil the roots of Japanese knotweed and it really helps combat Lyme's disease to a degree. It's not a cure, but there's benefits. But yes, so why potentially introduce foreign plants and everything in? What's the argument for it?
Well, I think first I'd say there's such a danger, and this is true in politics, this is true in plant design, this is true in all facets of our life, that having anything be explicit on one side or the other is just not productive. It's counterproductive. It's toxic, and I think it's
appreciate both sides.
You have to meet in the middle, mingle. And I think there are a lot of reasons for it in our case. But I say that to preface this because, in general, I'm much further on the spectrum towards saying yes, we should be planting native plants. That's the goal. For all these ecological reasons, for wildlife, for the soil, for us, for everything. But I think there are also issues with just putting this narrative down people's throats with such a black and white, aggression.
And it doesn't seem to be fair because plants spread just like animals spread, and they change with climate changes and everything too, which do typically naturally happen as well. So it's all in there.
Well, here's the biggest thing, I think. And again, you can argue this from many different levels. And this is one that I think has been well fleshed out. And so I won't be the first one saying this, but there's a very hard line to draw of what are we calling native? When is it native to? Where is it native to?
Right.
Because a lot of times we talk about a native garden and it's plants native to the US, which is a huge area.
Right.
Or even plants native to New England. Doesn't mean that it ever grew in Maine.
Right.
Or native to Brunswick, and it was never down here because of the different soils, right? So there's so many different layers and ways we can zoom in and out. And so that just plays into that issue with being so explicit about native or not native when what is it really? And that needs to be part of the conversation. So I think the intention is very positive, and I think it's important. And I also think we need to just be a little more lenient and open to these discussions, because there are times when right plant, right place doesn't necessarily mean only native. I'll give an example. Oftentimes, if someone says, I want a native only garden, great. And then you get this patch of plant bed that they put in only plants native to, let's even say New England, which is great. But it's done in a traditional way where the spacing is too far apart. There's so much mulch. They're still spraying it. They're going in and putting irrigation, whatever it is, right?
That irrigation is not native.
Well, that and there's so many inputs, right? So yes, everything you're putting in the ground is native to this region, but you're still then treating it like a traditional garden. And how much better is that really than a garden that has some introduced plants that aren't Japanese knotweed, that are things much more controlled and that we've had here forever, but aren't necessarily from the Ice Age in New England. How much better to have a full garden where we're not going in and putting mulch, that oftentimes people are putting mulch with dye in it, right? And we're putting too much water into the soil.
People use mulch with dye. That seems...
want it to look like fresh, brown, black soil all year round.
So that's the deal, that they kind of dye it that reddish thing?
Or black or brown. They want it to look very colorful, because otherwise you're just looking at bare ground when it's so sparse.
Maybe that's why my wife insisted on getting her own chipper, and I never asked about that, but yeah, we ran a lot of chipper.
Yeah, right. And so natural chips or a mulch without a dye is great, and certainly serves a purpose in a lot of gardens. But again, it's just that idea of, if you can create a system with a denser layer of plants and a really great community of plants, even if some aren't from New England, but that allows you not to have to use unnecessary water, and you don't need to go in and deal with pests in the same way, and you don't need to go in and put the labor and material into mulching and edging and fertilizing and all of these things, because you just have a healthier soil and a healthier plant community.
Right.
It just brings us back to that need to be in the middle ground somewhere and acknowledge that it's arbitrary always what is and what isn't native. And so I think we just need to have some humility to the fact that we don't really understand. And
right.
I'm not an ecologist, and most landscape architects and designers aren't ecologists, but our goal is to do the best we can for a site while also creating a place that people love, right? And so trying to balance those things in a responsible way for the environment.
I mean, birds are going to eat the plants and the seeds, take them somewhere flying, poop them out elsewhere. You can't put up air boundaries to say,
Or here's another example for you. Again, if someone said, I'm only putting native plants in, and you have a steep slope, for example, and in the past you've dealt with erosion and runoff and all of these problems. If you said, I'm only going to do natives, and so I'm going to fill the slope with wild strawberry or something that is native, whatever it is, some ground cover, you run the risk of choosing plants that you're saying, because they're native, they'll be good at holding the slope and preventing erosion and whatever. But potentially you're putting a plant like that, which is very shallow roots, that will cover the slope, but isn't necessarily holding a lot of earth below it.
Right.
When you might actually have been better putting in a grass that's native to the Midwest or somewhere further away, that has this really deep root system that's going to hold a lot of slope. And so obviously we have plants with different root systems that we can choose from that are native to New England. But the point is, just because we say it's a native doesn't necessarily mean it's the right plant for the goal we're trying to achieve.
Makes sense. Now, what should I plant to control our number one pest here in Maine, mosquitoes?
I can't help you with that. I think the biggest thing is water on a site, right? And obviously having breeding grounds is a thing, and trying to be responsible about how we have standing water on a landscape. I know there are certain plants that people say keeps them away. I mean, citronella related things, and maybe there's some merit to it. We've had them on our deck for a long time, and I don't know how much difference it makes. So I think the biggest thing is, if you have water, finding a way to make it move just enough that it's not standing and it doesn't become this breeding ground, and ideally getting water to go into the soil or go away as much as possible, unless you want to swim somewhere.
Right. Let's see here. First question from the Maine Home Design team. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to landscape design?
Yeah, similar to how we started this, I think for me it was just where I grew up and how I grew up, and spending time out in these landscapes. And at an early age, I wasn't out there appreciating the plants and specifics of horticulture and ecology in the way that I do today, but it was a very subconscious experience where I was exposed to it enough that then when I really was face to face with it in a landscape practice, both installation and design, it made sense why I was so drawn to it, because it was nostalgia. It was what I knew of beautiful landscapes from a kid. And I think for me, it's this blend of, the humanities, it's design, it's writing, it's coming up with solutions and being outside. So, for me before this, it was time on landscape crews. It was time teaching an outdoor education. It was working on a ranch. All of these things that were very different, but circled this same sphere of landscape management or of stewardship of a land on different scales.
Right.
This felt like that perfect blend.
Have you seen the guy that does? He's from New England. And he does New England forest forensics.
No.
So cool. He's got this like white beard and then like outdoorsy look, clothes on, blah blah blah. But he starts out the video by saying, by the end of the video, you're going to be able to tell when a tree fell, how long ago, what time of year it fell, and he tells you all these things that before you watch the video is like, no, dude, no way. And by the end of it, you're like, well, now I got to go walk through the forest, and you do it, and you start to see like the divots and pillows. What do they call them?
Sure. Yeah.
Stuff like he goes through the whole forest and like, all right, so this one here, this tree grew on the top of a root ball of a tree that probably fell over, and now the tree fell over in this direction. So it was this long ago because, and it was probably this type of storm because, oh, that does make sense. And it's just so weird to know that someone can do that and pass it along to you. It's just really amazing. But then he goes into also like how the New England landscape was drastically changed because of civil war in Portugal. And a guy smuggled out the Mariano wool, whatever, and it became a massive cash grab, essentially, in New England to be able to have all these sheep that have this specific wool that's much softer or whatever. And he snuck out of the country, like Portugal wouldn't let him out, if I'm saying that is the right country or whatever. But he saw the opportunity, got these sheep out, and then like a ton of them, became in the farms in New England. So they just cut everything down, made these rock walls. Then he goes through and tells you like, this is probably a field at one time that was agricultural. This one was probably for livestock because
I saw that video.
And then they would throw stones here, and this is a double wall because they'd clear, and then they'd throw the hand-sized stones. He pulls in, these are all hand-sized stones. It's just really amazing history from just found objects in nature, and reading that, which it just opens your mind and your eyes when you're in the woods to like start to read your environment. Whereas before I was always just kind of walking through and kind of like, hey, it's pretty, but now it's all of a sudden you can walk through and understand it, which kind of endears you to it. And super cool.
Well, and I think that's also part of why it's so important or so great to have a space of your own. If you have a garden of whatever kind, but something that gets you outside and gets you excited, for me, that's an opportunity, or that then engages me to become so much more interested in things like what you just described, where some people, myself included, for a long time, you walk through the woods and it's beautiful, it's great, but you're not really thinking about those specifics because you don't necessarily care. It's just a beautiful walk. And then you get enough trees in your garden or in your landscape, and you're becoming intimate with certain species or just the dynamics of a growing condition, that then you're out in the woods and you're saying, oh, I've seen that happen in my garden. Or you ask questions because you're saying, is that going to happen where I am? So being able to take things back to your home, I think is incredible.
Yeah.
And I think to your point about the woods and seeing the stone walls, we don't think about it all the time, but it's proof, and it's all the evidence we need that those were pastures and agricultural lands, and this was not a wooded area for a lot of the 18th, 19th century.
Yeah. I wish we still had a lot more pastured lands because I just love a view.
Right.
I don't know that it's the right thing to do, but man, the areas of Maine where you come upon more farming areas and you can just see a little bit rather than the trees right around the road. Oh, it's just so pretty. And especially like in Vermont, with all the steeper.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, whether this is intuitive or not, those areas are some of the best for wildlife and for ecosystem diversity, because if you have just forest or you have just meadow, you're getting only species that are happy and nesting in that environment. And when you get these edges, these woodland edges where you've got wood, you've got shrubby layer, you've got grass, you get this cacophony. I mean, you'll never hear more birds than when you're in an area where you're just on the edge of something. And it's, to be able to maintain and keep some of those areas open is so valuable.
See, that, again, a great suggestion and analogy from nature to put into our own society and political system to say, look, if we're all one, all the other, it's going to be really bad. Let's not have any grifters. Let's not, sure. But you have to appreciate the population will have a disposition this way and that way, pretty much 50-50. And if they can understand that we have to be together, you can't separate out. If you separate out, you become a monoculture, essentially.
Absolutely.
And that's just going to get really weird. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Question number 2. The other thing you're saying, like what got you into landscape design, that kind of just understanding like the subject matter is something that drew you throughout your whole life. I have 2 boys, and I can see it in them. One of them is far more technically or objectively oriented. He loves to take apart things, put them back together, and make things out of what he can find and put together, and in a very mechanical, like builds planes and stuff like that, rockets. And then the other one is much more so he can't stay in front of a television. He hates it. He has to be outside, interacting, moving. And he's an incredible nature photographer now. And he'll go out and sit in the woods. Like he never stops moving unless he goes out in the woods. And then he can sit for a long time and wait and just observe. And it's funny because I always would worry about him going out in the forest. I mean, we have black bears that come by our house and stuff. And, he's 13. He's not going to fight off a black bear. But I'll be walking through the forest with him thinking I got to watch for everything, and he sees everything, like everything, and points it out to me. And I start to realize, like, you've spent so much time in this environment, you feel it as part of you to a degree, right? That if there's something amiss or something moving, he picks up on it just so quickly. And my focused, continually running mind is just looking at where I'm stepping,
right.
And he's doing that and all of that. And that way that he has to physically, experientially interact with something active, and he's so incredibly talented at that, is a really interesting way to see how people are drawn to different subject matters that turn into a living.
Have you started to see patterns with him? Is there a certain facet of the woods that he's drawn to with his photos? Is it the birds? Is it the
wildlife in general? But primarily birds was huge interest for him. He's starting to develop into a little bit more landscape stuff occasionally if he gets like a wider focal length lens or something. I sold him some of my old stuff. I should probably give it to him if I were a softer father, but I'm old school, and it's like, no, you got to work, bud. So, but he worked for and bought it himself. He values it. He takes care of it. So I don't have to worry about any of it. But he really loves focusing in tight on the animals and finding these very intimate moments between them. But that time out in nature and that familiarity, you start to see how objectified and technical we've become in our society and what we do day to day. And when you can pull back from that and just be present and interact with things for a while, you start to see and value relationship rather than accomplishment so much more. And it's a really interesting thing that feeds us. And this last week, I was with helping friends that are going through a pretty difficult tragedy right now. And every morning I would drive my friend to the hospital, but I'd go and find flowers that I picked, not ones that I would buy. Probably initially because I'm just cheap, but I'm going to say also there's a lot of personal, like, I saw this and I got it out of nature for you. To me, it does mean more, and I have the money to buy flowers. But that, like, personally, I saw this. I thought these would go together well. I put them together for you, and here they are. It's a little bit of beauty to help you, the difficulty that you're going through right now, that just is that little thing that someone who's not in as bad of a position of you can do for you, that lets them know that you care, but is also that here's a little bit of life for you in these flowers. And just for that moment, it's just that little bit of there. It was really meaningful, that part of it for me, and it was meaningful for her. And there's something really in that our home is surrounded by a natural environment that we choose and shape and have to interact with, that is that thing that kind of completes the objectified home and the subjective landscape together in some sense.
Absolutely. My brother is an incredible wood turner, and something I'm starting to wade into, because I think it's, to your point with the flowers, there's something so much more meaningful about either something from your home or that has been thoughtfully created.
Right.
And so as we take down trees on landscapes at clients' houses, or if there's downed wood that is sort of a symbol of what is being removed for what is coming, I've been trying to enlist him as the great wood turner that he is to take a piece of wood from a client's site and make a bowl or a vase or something and give it. And then there's this piece that even if we're, there's some sadness or nostalgia about losing something on a site, you still have that reminder or touch back to what you had or what you do have.
Yeah, that's an interesting battle between my wife and I, where I would be far more open and emotional. She'd be a little more objectified and black and white and boundary driven, right? When it comes to trees, I'm always trying to cut them down because I want the view. That's where like my propensity starts. Like I gotta be able to see. I gotta be able to. And she's just like, she has a relationship with him, and it's like, kind of 1/10 of her parents dying each time I try and cut it. So it's always a battle of like, all right, on the chopping block today, potentially, could we maybe, So it's always a fight back and forth. That part of us is a little flip-flop, which is interesting. But
right.
Yeah.
Your point about views is interesting, because I was similar to you, and I wanted open view. That was always my previous inclination. I mean, working on ranches out west, spending time out there in my college years, I was drawn to the open western landscape, which is very different. And coming back now, I'm appreciating more and more the woodland, but it's that innate thing. It's not, we're drawn to it, and it's why populations are growing so fast in Denver and Bozeman and these places, California at the beginning. But there are these places with big vistas and views and open country that it's not a coincidence that we are attracted to those. It's a subconscious guttural feeling of safety a little bit. We know what's on the horizon. There's, the predator's not coming for us. The enemy from the next village over, we know when he's about to get here.
Interesting.
And we've carried that with us. It's why grasslands are so attractive to us now. It's why these lower woodland areas work, because they're areas that have been cleared and we know what's around us. And it's why forests are this sort of primeval, scary scene in movies, and why sometimes the darkness is not as inviting to us.
See, there's a flip flop for my wife and I as well, because she likes like really tight, like that. I think that to her probably offers some kind of hidden safety.
Yeah.
Where to me, the visual, I can feel like, okay, I can relax. All right, check again. All right, okay. Maybe that's my internal groundhog, but yeah.
I think it's the mix, right? It's if you can see and you can feel contained, that's the perfect medium of both.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I like that. I'm gonna have to listen to this again on date night. This is basically marriage counseling, dude. This is great. All right. Is there anything you feel is critical to include in each of your projects?
No, I mean, we talked about the Venn diagram, and I think again, it's critical to be listening to all three of those stakeholders. It's what do we bring, what is the client bringing emotionally and from experience on this space, and what is the site telling us, and I think the maybe the fourth piece to that is what we talked about at the beginning of not only what does the client know about the site and what is the site telling us, but what is here physically, and so thinking hard about how can we have as little impact as possible, I think is a big part of the early process with getting the most impact we can to create the spaces and accomplish the goals that are set forth. How do we also hurt as little of this land as possible and keep our footprint as minimal as possible? Now,
what is hurting the land, as when we refer to impact in a negative sense? What is the hurting the land at that point? What's the potential there that we should try and steer away from?
It can be very nuanced and subtle what's happening. Some things are more obvious, taking down more trees than you have to. If we know the footprint, putting up enough fencing and protection to say, let's protect everything within this and let it be what it was. But then it can be the less tangible things like you described, where compaction happens, and saying, if vehicles are going to come in here, we need to put down mats and diffuse the weight, or don't come in here at all. And this, if we don't have to.
My wife was a watchdog on that. Like, she wouldn't let the excavators into certain areas, and they were just like, "You crazy lady." And I was like, I think she knows what she's talking about.
It's important. Yeah, protecting from compaction, you're protecting tree roots. We have a project in Vermont now where there's this beautiful maple right next to the house, and design decisions have been made because of this maple, and we're trying to save it. And the house design is now informed by the fact that we want to keep this tree. And so now it's of the most possible importance that everything that happens from here on out, we have a very wide berth and a very strict fence saying nobody comes in here until this project is done.
So did you do the tree drip edge kind of no one drives in this kind of thing?
Yeah, big chain link, very attractive fence.
Not like the plastic bright orange little thing that you could accidentally go through.
Well, or not so accidentally. It's easy to move. Someone says, "Oh, I'm just going to move it for 20 minutes. I need to get in there." But if you make it hard to get into. And then I think the other piece of damage is, if we're digging up areas or we're bringing in fill in more areas than we have to, we're potentially encouraging or bringing in weeds and bad things that are going to become a problem on the site. So much fill has Japanese knotweed in it, or has
no fill was brought in for us. And if you are going to bring in fill, it's got to be like burnt or something, or like crazy expensive if you're going to like ensure that nothing's coming in. So we've had to like basically, okay, if we're digging there, please save that dirt over here, because then we have to reuse it there. And she's been pretty hardcore about that, which has been good. So
yeah, sounds like she's on
I basically complain about everything and then later apologize. And, you're probably right about that. But so 20 years of experience, I can say that. Hopefully you get that already. That would be great for your future. All right. How do you start your design process?
I think, again, it's that same thing about listening to what's there. Again, obviously it starts with the client, but for me, it's a deep dive, not into what do I think will look good here, but what is here. So it's a soil test, it's soil analysis. It's when we get the survey back from the land surveyors, having a proper tree and vegetation survey. So we get the bones from them, and then I'll go back through and track what's on this site. What do we have growing, and make a list of what's good. What do we want to support here? What's bad? What management plan do we need for the things here that we don't want here?
Right.
And then regardless of the design itself and the master plan and the bones, we're at least thinking holistically about what does this site need from us? And are we going to be taking efforts and strides in our design that are a waste of time because the soil is telling us you shouldn't try that, right? If it's too much clay, or if we don't have enough drainage, or if the pH is what it is, there are certain things that if you don't think about that in advance and you come up with a palette purely based on aesthetics, you're potentially wasting a big investment on things that just wouldn't have grown there.
Right. So now when you come to understanding a client's desires and what you think for the site and what the site has, you then have to start making suggestions and bringing forth ideas based on a decision hierarchy, fundamental philosophical foundations that you have that you say bad idea, good idea from. What are those, and what are, like, from the deepest, like, we don't contradict this one, and as you go up, you can contradict them, but be careful. Like, what are your decision hierarchies in saying that? Like, some people would say no native plants and nothing comes in unless it was already in the boundary. Different people, different things. For you, what is that strata of decision hierarchy?
I think the first that ideally you have some collaboration on, but oftentimes is one of the bigger factors as we get started, is what is in place with an architect, or what plans are in place when we're already thinking about driveway and where the septic is going to be, and some of these things that ideally we can have some say in as far as what makes sense from a land perspective. But if these things are in place, if there's an existing septic, if there's an existing well, how do we work with that? Because those are certain things that you're not, if it's a perfectly good working system, you're on most projects not suggesting moving those things, and you're trying to work around them as best you can, because you're already spending enough on the improvements. Let's not spend another however much money on putting in a new well. And these things that we should do our best to be thoughtful and respectful of. And so I think that's the ground layer of what are bones that we have to think around and that aren't necessarily our decisions to make, that are already there or that are happening. And then beyond that, I think it's like you said with the hierarchy, it's just going from the more macro bones to finally getting to the finer bits of the color and the texture and the plant piece at the top. And so first it's about circulation and where do we need to get to on this site? So not thinking about the type of stone, not thinking about how wide the path is, not thinking about the paving pattern first, but if we're getting out of the house here and we're drawing this in diagrams, what are the main circulation routes around the house? Where else could we be going? Where do we need that accessible space? And that can then start to dictate where is there green? Where is there stone? Right. Where do we need to retain slopes? And it all ultimately comes down to how do we need to use this space? There's that interesting idea, which I'm sure you've heard lots about, desire paths.
No, I heard about
a couple other words, but if you look on a college campus, for example, or anyone's house.
So are you going to say like where people walk where there's not a sidewalk?
Yes.
So that always bugs me that people didn't have the right idea of how humans were going to move to begin with, right, to where they actually ruin the design, but not ruin the design because the design should have counted for this. So, okay, right. Desire paths.
So that's why that second rung of the pyramid of priorities is important, of thinking about circulation so early on, because I think purely on 2D, we can say this layout of a walkway looks awesome and it fits the shape of the house, and right. Proportionally and geometrically, this looks beautiful. And then you get to the site and you see actually people are always going to hop off the porch and walk this way. Right. So if we don't put a path there, it's going to happen anyway, whether we put in a bunch of beautiful plants, whether it's lawn, whatever it is, right, that will become a path. And so I think it's important. It's a conversation with the client. It's you just spending time on a site, but just drawing out squiggly lines saying, as I walk around this property, where does it feel natural to walk? And right. If the layout that you drew in CAD doesn't line up with that, it's time for some reconciling and right. saying, how do we blend these things together?
Yeah, at the high school I went to, there, just rectilinear paths, and there would always be this one dirt path that went past the boys' dorm to gym. And I think they finally paved it, and they were like, fine, we're never going to stop this. That was always funny to me how people do that. And
it almost becomes art when you look at those pictures on college campuses of it's this perfect grid of paving. Mm-hmm. And then there are also these perfect diagonals of all the the goat paths.
Like,
and
I'm here, that's there, and where I want to go.
Right,
so
right. It becomes an even more beautiful shape, even though it's telling you that you put this in wrong in the first place. But.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this last week I was out in California helping friends, and we were in the Oakland, Berkeley area. Mm-hmm. And in the Berkeley Hills area, the roads are so funny. It's like if you were to assign a personality or political disposition fitting of the town, it is personified in its roads. They wander and go everywhere and intersect and cause potentially a lot of danger. They're very interesting and beautiful, but they're also not easy. They're very complex to navigate. You can get lost really quick. It kind of feels like chaos. Very beautiful, very experiential. You have to be fully immersed in what you're doing to get anywhere safely. And if you're not, you're going to be in trouble. Now contrast that with Chicagoland. Or the prairie. It's just a grid across the whole thing. Stoplight to stoplight, easy, probably safer, and all of that. Kind of boring, And it's really interesting to like, oh, okay, I get it. This is wild and interesting and beautiful, but at the same time, spending all that time in that, driving for the last week like I was, like all day, every day, pretty much back and forth to hospital, it's just wore on you so badly because you'd have these like snaking roads in the hills coming to one like 6-point intersection, and just everyone's got a stop sign.
Right.
And they're just all going, and if you lived there and did it every day,
right,
okay, it's patterned into your existence, right, and you understand it through that. But as a visitor, thrown into like such a lack of law and order is how it feels, but it is not. They
Right.
understand it. They're, it's fine. But yeah, it's really interesting it's a very, in some ways, a very unobjectified way of getting around in that sense, whereas the other one is far more objectified. And in that far more objectified one, if you overlay that in a sidewalk pattern, you're going to get these desire lines, or whatever you call it, right? That are going to start to resemble more so like these curvy things going everywhere, which is more the natural way of moving. But if you're trying to get stuff done, go grid. But that's not living.
Well, you think about where houses were built all over New England and then the highway system, right? And you've got houses all through the hills, and they were mostly put in places where they were smartly positioned. They had the right exposure with the sun, or they weren't down in a floodplain, or it was good agricultural land. And so the roads did what you're describing. They were old dirt roads going through the mountains. And then at some point we said we need an interstate going straight through it, which then, went straight through some of these houses and changed the circulation patterns. But it's the same idea of now it's what's efficient from here to here, not thinking about anything between A and B. It's all about the straight line.
Yeah, I'm always interested in whatever you can perceive. There's usually a flip side to it. If you see something bad, that trait that caused the bad is also a positive in some way, and vice versa always. It's just so interesting to be able to take something like that and hold it and realize it's both things. Don't get overly one way or the other on this. But
and that segues into the garden pretty nicely of, I think there is a time and a place and a benefit to straighter lines, and having places that we feel are intentional, right? Whether they're edged with straight lines or whether the path itself is straight and you've got multiple paths. But something about that innate feeling of we control this space. We put the walkway where we want the walkway, or the patio has sharp enough edges that I feel contained and good here, whatever someone's style is. I think that can contrast nicely with the more wild feeling we're talking about. If you can be more natural on the edges, as long as right around us we feel like we've given ourselves the box that we subconsciously as humans want to feel safe. It helps sometimes.
Yeah, our home is really minimalist, fairly modern, rectilinear, and then our landscape is very, very natural and curvy and all over the place to a degree. Really pretty. It's like these granite hills where we're at, which is weird because they're actually like sloped things, and it's fun because you can just take a power washer in areas where it's a little spotty. You can just cut, and the dirt goes out, and you're just left with little roots on very shallow soil, and you just trim along that, and the whole thing rolls up like a carpet, and you've just got bare stone that for like, a landscaping feature. Yeah. It's just so cool to like, oh, all right, I'm landscaping with rocks that are already here. This is great, you know, and such a fun thing to kind of get into. I always used to laugh at like people my age that would like, I'm kind of getting into landscaping. Like, you know what?
Yeah,
but
it happens.
It happens. It doesn't. It probably just means that you died early. So, let's see. What do you find is key to designing a climate-forward garden?
Climate forward is a term, I think, getting more and more used, but this idea that everything is shifting north, right? So we have all these, well, first weather, we can talk about, it's getting warmer, right?
Yeah.
The temperatures now here are what they were further south a couple of years ago and even further south before.
Since I moved here, it feels like it gets hotter in the summer for longer than when we moved here in 2003.
Right.
Which is that's kind of scary.
Right. No one had AC when I was growing up, and now if you don't,
neither did we. Like even when we moved here, and you didn't need it. And now
you kind of have to, or live in the woods. And so the weather is moving north. With that, plants are moving north, and so as things get warmer, as things get wetter, and we get more of that mid-Atlantic climate, that's just welcoming things that we're happy down there. So what's happening is this double-edged sword, this twofold issue of we have things coming up that haven't grown here before, some good, some bad. And because things are changing so fast here, it's not as cold in the winter, it's wetter, whatever the reasons, trees and plants that we've evolved with and that have been here forever, that truly aren't, native, again, whatever we want to call that, are starting to die out and get pressured out by these new plants because they are now in an environment that they're not used to anymore. It's inhospitable to things that have spent millennia here.
Right.
Some things more suited to adapting than others, but as we start to get more pests coming up and hurting our beech trees and our hemlocks and our ash, all of these trees that were such a classic part of the New England vernacular are going away, or we're starting to have to treat them or manage in some way. But we're at this crossroads now where we have to think about, as what we know in the landscape is starting to weaken or maybe go away a little bit, what do we want the next landscape to look like? And it sounds a lot like man over nature, person over nature, but it's inevitable. And if I think the wrong approach is for us to say we can be hands off and let things do what they're going to do and everything will right itself. That's sort of the same attitude as saying, we're not going to manage for forest fires by burning and clearing, whatever. We're going to let forest fires do their thing because they're natural, right? What's been happening for the last 100 years? Sort of the same mindset of nature does what it does. We shouldn't touch it. It knows how to handle these things. First of all, we've always managed the landscape, so that's a myth, right? It's not doing its own thing without our intervention, whether positive or negative. But now is an opportunity for a positive intervention from us, where if we see all the good trees starting to die out and all of these invasive plants coming from elsewhere and being really happy in the warm, wet climate we have, what do we do about that? And so it's this existential question in a way of, do we keep just hammering the same point and planting the same native trees over and over because it's what's native here, even though they're starting to not be as happy? Or do we start to look at what's coming from south of us and say, as everything moves up, what do we want to support? What do we want to endorse? And what do we want to give a good shot so that they can really go head to head and compete with the bad stuff that's coming?
That's interesting. It's like no different in our society. Like, you feel change happening and you can try and over control it and say, no, not going to be any change. And we're going to go back to how it was again. And that is very heavy-handed and forceful, and it's not respectful of the autonomy of the people within a system. And to not adapt to the change is just seemingly unfair and unempathetic and cruel. That overhanded, like, nope, it's only going to be this in here. It's always been that. It's never going to change. Well, that's obviously not the case, and probably not a good way of approaching or growing with change, right? And that ability to say, okay, as this changes, how do we keep the value of the stability and the ability for the people in that environment to thrive, or the plants in that environment to be stable and thrive? The interesting thing to me is, like, if things go too far out of check and you only consider the happiness of something by a few metrics, as far as, like, does this thing propagate and does that mean it's happy? Well, kudzu vine in the South is a good study then, because they had sloping things that they thought they could bring kudzu in.
Right.
And now, like, good luck looking anywhere and not seeing kudzu everywhere.
Right.
It's a real issue that thing was happy in its original environment, probably because of some control that was on it in that area. But now you bring it to here without the proper bringing of all the other things that it was a bi-symbiotic relationship with. You have to do that. And so if there's change too quickly, disaster.
Absolutely.
If there's no change, disaster.
Absolutely. I think balance or stability, the word that goes hand in hand with that is resilience, right? And if we again just are supporting the things that are going to do okay here to a fault, and the things that don't, and we get this less and less diversity.
It becomes more welcoming for things outside of your system, which is good and okay, but you need to welcome them in that balanced
we need
way.
to be smart about what's coming, and we need to just be aware that having more diversity, even if it's from a little further south, is good. Because, I mean, you've seen places where they grew only one kind of oak on Main Street in a town or something, and then you get some disease, and then there's not a single tree.
Elm Street in Biddeford.
Perfect example.
Bare and ugly.
Right.
I owned 2 buildings on there back when they would give money to anyone who had a pulse. I shouldn't have bought them. It was a horrible decision. But anyways, it was on Elm Street. And there's not a single tree on the street.
Right.
It used to be an incredible street with just these huge old elms, but Dutch
Right.
elm came and wiped them out.
Right.
Done.
In the same way, like having a purely native forest is awesome. Like that's incredible. But we start to lose that resilience because we have less and less diversity of those native plants. We're just opening ourselves up to attack and less stability and strength when all the new stuff comes, good and bad.
Right.
And so thinking hard about it. And I think to your point of the kudzu, we have a case study of the South, right? We don't have to look, like you said, we don't have to move things from Georgia to Maine yet, but things that were happy and were relatively checked in their ecosystem services a couple hours south of us as they start to come up, we have a good sense of how they interact with our species to an extent, right? Certain birches or certain hickories or things that mostly have been mid-Atlantic or, Rust Belt plants. It's not this guessing game really of how is it going to deal with the northern forest, because it's just been on the edge this whole time. And so we've been able to study and see how they interact with similar places that now is home for us. Right.
Yeah. Let's see. We talked about the dangers of echo chambers preaching native only. Do you think garden design should echo your client's taste or be site driven? And when we say garden, are we talking food or just landscape and presence of the surrounding area of a residence or whatever? Or?
I think both. And I think we touched on that, the idea of, it has to be that Venn diagram of the three, right? It's site driven and it's client driven, and it has to be a marriage of both.
Oh, here's a question I'd had kind of related to that when you come to your designs for the landscape, how much does the aesthetic of the home design relate to that?
Yeah.
And do you prefer a certain type of architecture to design with?
Great question. I think the type of architecture that I appreciate purely in the vacuum of the architecture is different maybe than the kind of architecture I like to design a landscape around, which is funny.
Interesting.
Because I have become quickly a lover of, old homes. And I think there's nothing more charming than something that has the history and the bones of what was here. And I love the look of it. And my wife has been a big part of that. I was not as literate in the architecture side of things. And I've quickly come to appreciate the detail that went into those old homes. I mean, our house have these incredible curved walls. The people that built them were shipbuilders in Brunswick. And it was just this level of building that you just doesn't happen today,
and
for whatever
especially
reason.
Not outside of New England. Like,
For sure.
if you start to look at the upper common level of homes in California compared to here, it just does not compare.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is, even though I love that style, and if I drive by a house, that's what I'm saying, oh, I love that. But then you have to think about what was the landscape like when that house was built. And the funny thing is, people weren't landscaping in the 1800s,
They were just
right?
clear-cutting
They had
mostly,
a path,
right?
not even a path. They probably had a step at the front door. They had pasture. They had a barn for whatever animals they had. They might have had some vegetables growing somewhere.
Yeah.
But there were not borders around the house, and there wasn't a landscape in the sense that we think of today. And so trying to impose a designed garden on these spaces, I think, can be beautiful, but it's very out of touch or sort of jarring if you're actually thinking about the character of the site, because those houses never really would have had those things. And so in that way, not that you can't create a beautiful garden on an old house. That's what I'm trying to do at our place. And we're not living in that time where it's all about survival and work and whatever anymore. We can appreciate gardens. Now we have time. But visually, there's still something about that of saying, any of these patios wouldn't have been here. And how do I reconcile that so it still feels right for this space?
Right.
Whereas a more modern house being designed, something about it just feels easier from a design perspective of there's no precedent to say that this wasn't here in the past. And people are designing nice sliding or French doors out onto a space that are perfect for a patio, right? Things that weren't part of a house build back in the day. So yeah, I guess that's my answer, is what I'm drawn to from a purely architectural standpoint is maybe different than what I actually enjoy designing around. It's sort of two
So what do you
different
enjoy
styles.
designing around?
Slightly more, it doesn't have to be a modern looking house, but I think houses that aren't steeped in that history sometimes have, again, just more opportunity for more of an in-depth, involved landscape. Just again, because of that little, I don't know how to properly verbalize or vocalize the fact that again, you want to think about the site and what was there. And when I do that, and when I walk around one of these old properties, I think there's no way there was ever a hedge here, a patio here, these things. And so it could look great, but we're starting to sway away from what was the history and the character of this place.
So there's just that suggestion, because this existed previously, there's some idea that we're not creating something completely new here. The architecture was already here. And so there's a little bit of sentiment of of restraint towards the original intent, which you don't have to do, but there's always that suggestion in the back of your thinking that says, well, this is not in relation to the original. So, I don't know.
Yeah, restraint is certainly the word. I mean, it's not to say that when we get a project with an old house and clients that are in one of these situations, we're not thinking about the landscape for how it can be used today, right? We're not trying to pretend that we're back milking the cows and you've got the horse tied up by where the garage is today. That's not our landscape anymore, so we don't have to pretend it is. But it's just one extra consideration and layer, which you don't have to fully think about on a newer build because there isn't that precedent to have to contend with.
Right.
But it's certainly not. I'm certainly not saying there shouldn't be patios and gardens on old houses. There should be, for sure.
How dare you?
Yeah.
All right. What are the benefits in investing in a greater density of plants, aside from more oxygen being produced?
You can look at it first through maybe more practical or financial benefits. And so oftentimes there's the first hiccup to this, or first hurdle, which is saying we want to get the best looking garden we can while spending as little as we can. It's a fair thing to say, right? Why spend more if you don't have to? It's totally valid to say.
I can come up with reasons, but
right. Then you look into, well, maybe you love gardening and you just want to fill it, and that's a reason in itself. But if your argument against it is financial, it's, I don't want to spend as much on plants and I think it'll still look fine. You can then do the math and pull out the calculator and say, if I only fill this halfway and it looks good, but it doesn't look like a full, rich, naturalistic garden, densely packed, then every year you're going to go in with mulch. You're paying for mulch. Every year you're going in, or you're paying someone to go in and weed and to edge and whatever other inputs you want to put into it. But as long as there's bare soil and there's open sunlight getting in,
anything's going to grow.
You're weeding, you're maintaining the space, you're watering it more than you have to.
Right.
The upfront investment of more plants means that things are going to establish in a way. You need less irrigation, you need less inputs, you need less mulch, and you need less. There's less need to think, I need to input annuals every year to fill the voids that feel too sparse. Just do it up front. You get this thing that will last forever in some way as it evolves, and you're really decreasing the financial costs in the long term. The whatever it is, $60 of mulch you're buying every spring, or whatever the numbers are, depending how big your garden is. So financially, there's a reason. Ecologically, it's sort of similar. It's hand in hand. Of the more green we can have and the less bare ground we can have, it means that we're helping the soil structure more. There's less open space that people are walking in and compacting things. There is less heat getting into the soil. We're maintaining the soil temperature by having this canopy over everything,
right.
which is important. That also means moisture levels, right? Again, just by not having heat drying out the soil, it's keeping the moisture in the same way mulch would have.
Yeah, that area where my grass is, then if it doesn't rain enough, it just kind of like...
Right, exactly. So there are those benefits. There's more cover for wildlife, right? The more cover you have, you're getting insects, you're getting birds, you're getting whatever else you can think of that then is benefiting from protected spaces, from shelter, from more food by having seed heads and all of these things. So I think, not even thinking about the visual of just having a developed, rich garden, you're doing more for wildlife and you're keeping money in your pocket in the long term when you say, let's just fill this now. And budget is always something to consider, and you can do things in phases. But I think if anyone ever says, I'd rather not spend that extra however many dollars, you're going to spend it next year on maintenance.
Let's see. There was a follow-up question that I was really trying to keep in my head. There it is. Because of my wife's propensity to not allow any foreign plants onto the property, I find that I do a lot of our landscaping by going into the forest and finding, young plants that I like and then bringing them out and replanting them. What's your advice on that?
Tread lightly. I think there are certain things that's great, and I think just having that experience of feeling like you're connected to it and you're bringing things is awesome. In my, where I grew up, that's how everything that's big and mature and tall now was that exact same thing. When I was born, my dad and mom were out there pulling up little hemlock seedlings, and now they're monsters on the driveway. It's awesome. But I also think there are certain things we need to be thoughtful about from a sustainable harvesting perspective, right? We've got these beautiful trilliums and ferns and things that will come back in our landscapes. Ramps are another example. They're in the leek family. They're people sell them at farmers markets now. It's a very good oniony plant that is harvested in the woods, and it takes a long time to spread and to regrow. And so these are the sorts of things that we have this incredible resource in the woods, and we want to share in the bounty of what's growing around us, and also try to be thoughtful about the fact that if we dig up this piece, it's going to be 7 years before it comes back, or whatever the number for certain plants are.
So you're saying, like, if you're going into an ecosystem and you take too much out of that ecosystem, you're creating a small imbalance in that area, and it can have kind of ripple effects.
It's an imbalance, and also it's just in the name of trying to not have a negative impact on diversity. And if there's a handful of this one plant growing in the woods, and you take too much of it, and it eventually doesn't have the ability to spread or maintain its position in the woods, we're sort of adding to extinction causes, right? With things that are rarer and rarer. So I think there's a mix. There's some things that it's awesome to find that blending of home and forest, and there are certain things that we just need to think about. Could I buy that at a nursery instead of taking it from the woods, where that's already grown and planted and in a planting medium, and it's not doing any harm to the woods, and I can have the same plant, versus taking something that potentially you're affecting the livelihood or the long-term experience of that plant in the forest.
Right.
So.
The things I've used so far have mostly been just like low-lying blueberries for this one area that's pretty sparse. They've been really hard to keep when I transfer them, because typically I'll transfer them late in the spring and they don't have enough, I think, time before heat. But I'd say I've had about a 60% success rate with those, but I only do like one little foot square plant at a time and try and just keep it that way.
Sure.
And then we've pulled out smaller pines to kind of just replant for some boundary kind of stuff, or just accents. In pulling pines out of the large pine stands, they all seem to kind of grow together and kind of kill each other. Is there a good way of managing a pine stand in a forest that helps it become that a little bit more groved feel of mature pines? Is that even a healthy thing to want, or what's the idea there?
It's a good question, and you'll get a much more articulate answer from a forester. But I think the short of it is, in areas where we have these dense pine stands and there's nothing else growing, it's mostly areas that have been logged, right? And we've created these monocultures. And pines are as native to here as anything. It's our state, our eastern pine is our tree. But it was always part of a system where they were growing up under a mature canopy of oaks and maples and whatever, or vice versa. And it's this sort of story of succession of different species. And so when we get an area that's just pine or just spruce or whatever, typically that's an area we've been sort of disturbing enough to the point where it's not really a natural system, in a way that now the tall pines that are creating this closed canopy are preventing a lot of those other trees that we had in the past from ever really reaching maturity.
Right.
So, the short answer of it is, a forester would probably say, let's start to thin certain areas so we can get more sunlight down to the ground and let other things come up and add to that diversity again. But it's such a fine line, and it's again, in the name of not disturbing natural balances, that's the sort of thing that's incredibly valuable to have a forester or a logging group come out that can really thoughtfully talk about how do we sustainably harvest trees in a way to promote more of that biodiversity, as opposed to just going in and cutting and saying we're going to see what happens.
Right.
Because there is some science to it, and there are people that are equipped to give those answers.
Yeah, I think our land it felt, areas of it feel like a very unhealthy forest where there's just tons and tons of dead stuff and falling over and tree fell. And then there was one part that we had like a kind of a swampy area. And then just right uphill from that was a really, really dense pine stand. Like you go into it and it feels like, oh, it's almost sundown in the middle of the day, really, really dense. And that part ended up being kind of our front yard. So it got completely taken out and opened up. And that is kind of where we, rearranged the earth to place the house and all that. So it just went regardless. But kind of down towards a river small river that goes by our house, and to the north, there's this kind of low-lying valley that just has tons and tons of. Anytime we have a storm, it just seems like trees are coming down in there and things are unhealthy. But then a little bit beyond that, there's these huge old pines that have been there forever that are just, you can barely wrap your arms around them.
Yeah, you can see the difference. And that's part of it is, again, trees that weren't necessarily meant to be the top canopy trees, or at least being the only ones. Birch is a great example where it's a great understory tree, and in a landscape, having a nice multi-stem paper birch or something is beautiful, and we love it. But it was always meant, in most conditions, it was meant to be an understory tree. There was some dappled light coming in. It was the hardwoods above. It was the pines above. And the birches stayed nice and compact, and they were that mid-level thing. And then in areas where you get too much sun, you cleared an area, you cut all the trees, and you left some beautiful birches. A couple of years later, those birches skyrocketed because they've never seen so much sun in their life. Oh. And then they split in the first storm because they're not meant to be that big.
Right.
So it comes back to that idea of what was here before we were here, or early in our stage of being here, and what are we trying to restore this to? Because it's a really nuanced topic of, again, what is our natural state here in New England from a forest perspective and a meadow perspective.
So why is it that if you look at a birch wrong, it dies, and maples you cannot kill?
Well, you can kill a maple. They split easily. I mean, you see a lot of they'll survive. You see a lot of the trees that at some point early in their life they had something happen, and now they're a two-pronged fork. Right. But birches, our maples, we can have maples growing in wet areas. We can have them in dry areas. They'll tolerate serious winters. Some of them will tolerate salt pretty well, depending on the species. I think a big part of it is that they've been a tree that is reaching for the sun, and so they've grown in a lot of different conditions, being the top guy in the forest. Okay. And the understory trees can be so much more malleable or vulnerable to changes within that canopy.
So they're just more sensitive, and they grow to fill a very specific kind of like, all right, I can survive here. And then if you change that environment,
right?
Because we had a beautiful stand of some kind of poplar, aspen, and birch. And my wife left them, and it was pretty, and I was like, I don't think these are, and one by one, they all died. And that was kind of sad because it was a really pretty stand of them, but
it's that great lesson in nature that we get over and over again. I mean, you see a birch growing like on a boulder on the side of the highway, right, with no soil. The roots they found one little pocket and they're growing, and it's a happy birch tree. And then we try to put it in a garden with all the best soil you could imagine, and they die. And part of that is because maybe we're giving it too much good soil or too much water, but also it's just a good ego check and reminder that things know how to grow, and we can't always impose the same soil conditions and the same growing conditions on every plant and expect them to be happy.
Yeah, it's just not a durable. It's a very it just feels like this is where I can exist.
Right.
But if you change it, we're out.
Right.
Yeah, we have one birch that is, for me, I think the biggest birch I've ever seen. My wife measured it and looked up online that they shouldn't grow that big, but it's right amongst these pines that kind of protect it, I guess. And it's super tall. And so I think it's getting light, but then also being protected.
Yeah.
And I don't think the area there has probably been disturbed in 50 to 100 years.
That helps.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll topple sometime, but it's pretty impressive to see when you get down to the bigger pines. You start to, see like porcupines and raccoons occasionally, and then you see these other trees that grow up amongst them, and
Right.
it starts to make you kind of feel small amongst them, which is really cool.
Right. There was a great book called The Overstory. I don't know if you read that. A lot of pieces to it, but there's so many nods and little vignettes about being up in the top of the canopies of these trees, specifically out west in the redwoods and all of them. But any tree, you look at it and you don't really realize how much of a world there is up there. You get on some of the branches and you're X number of feet off the ground, and there are plants growing in the trees because there's water has collected and soil has collected, and there's these landscapes in the canopy. It's an unbelievable world up there that we just don't ever get to see, and we have no understanding of.
Yeah, my kids will climb up to the top of these massive pines and take their camera, and like they come back and show me, and I'm like, oh, jeez, what are you doing up there?
Yeah.
But it's so cool that for a kid, like before we were in town, Biddeford, and our yard wasn't probably bigger than this studio. It's tiny, tiny. And when we'd first go out to the land that we were able to find, like the kids would just sit on a stump and be like, what are we supposed to do here? And we kind of knew like they'll figure it out. And like eventually they became the boys of the forest. But when we first started going, they just like didn't really know what to do with themselves. It was interesting, very interesting to see how it affected them and how affectionately we were gone over the winter and they just wanted to be home and run into the forest. They just love to get up and just run into the forest. It's just such a natural thing for a little boy anyways, is all I know, to want to go do.
Yeah.
So,
I hope they never lose that. It's a great trait.
it's been really interesting all of this kind of information for me has been building up, and I haven't really had a lot of interactions with people to be able to talk about it. You probably know Todd Richardson. I've talked with him a little bit back and forth about stuff, but to sit down with someone in a long form conversation and kind of learn more about your expertise and your thinking process and everything else is really interesting to help illuminate my experience and guide my path forward as I do that a little bit on my own as I can afford and time allows, and learn from it, which is really fun. So
it was a pleasure. And it sounds like your wife is running a good landscape operation over there. So tell her I said, keep it up.
She is. I got in so much trouble for putting mosquito dunks in the pond because I was so sick of mosquitoes. She did not want me to do that. I did it anyways, and I got found out. I paid for that one. That's why I got to find some way of like the first thing we did in April was like dig out the trench that was allowing this part of the pond where it drained out to just kind of get stagnant water. So we had to just make sure things were raked out so they would drain and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, thank you for coming down to Biddeford from Brunswick. For people to know more about what you do, what you're into, and how to work with you, where should they find you?
You can find us online. It's gbrlandscape.com. Our office is in the Mill in Fort Andros in Brunswick. And Instagram's been a great source of community. We find a lot of people, photographers, designers, clients, and hoping to just foster more community on platforms like that.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.